Okay, so good evening to those of you who are joining us live and those of you who will be listening to the recording later. Welcome as well. As always, it's a great privilege to be here to have these important conversations related to Chinuch, important children that we are entrusted in their care. And there's so many questions, there's so many ideas, and I appreciate all the questions and I think areas of query that came in advance, and I thank you so much for that. It definitely helps me frame the conversation and prepare in an appropriate way. I do want to just begin by saying that the discussion webinar tonight is dedicated in honor of Refuah Shleima for Daniela Bas Elia. She should have a complete and speedy recovery in every way. And as always, if you want to dedicate or sponsor a future event, webinar session of Chinuch Through Connection, please reach out and be happy to discuss that with you. I just want to frame the conversation by saying that what we're talking here tonight is really a much broader topic, which affects parents across the whole year, schools, principals, directors, and so on. And we have just funneled it a little bit to fit a narrative and a conversation referring specifically to camp. But really what we are taking is ideas that I personally have the great opportunity to share and discuss and teach with principals, teachers, parents as part of the Chinuch Through Connection platform. And if you are interested in hearing more and being more involved in what's going on, then please reach out. And I'm happy to add you to our mailing list, happy to add you to all the information that goes out and discuss opportunities for yourself, for your school, for your community as well. With that said, I'm excited to be joined here by a good friend of mine, Rabbi Yarden Blumstein. And I think that it's going to add so much spice and life to the conversation. We've known each other for many years and we've been through camp together as well. So that's a nice opportunity to have seen a lot of these ideas in real life. One of the reasons that I reached out to Rabbi Blumstein specifically for tonight's conversation is because I do believe he has a unique view of the situation, having kids in camp, involved with teenagers of all backgrounds, from the most frum to those who are not yet there, those that are challenged in the greatest ways that we should never be aware of. And I think that background and that eye on the ground is very, very valuable when we're talking about how we send away our kids into an environment where really it is teenagers who are caring for them, teenagers who we may or may not understand, some better, some worse, some years go better, smoother, and some don't. So I'm really excited for what Rabbi Blumstein is going to bring to the table here tonight. And please ask him any questions that you may have, and I think you'll love the answers as well. Just to give you a technical introduction, questions will be at the end. So put them in the chat box. I'm not going to monitor it throughout the session. I will just go to it at the end when we're finished the formal conversation, and then I'll answer them one by one. That way there's a structure. Those who want to just listen to the actual presentation won't be disturbed, and then we'll stay on all night answering your questions and your conversations. Well, I can't speak for him, so he'll let you know when he gets on the microphone. So without further ado, we're going to begin. So I think the first point that's worth reminding ourselves is that camp definitely has a great value, and we look and we explore the sichos and the different talks that the Rebbe gave and the letters that the Rebbe wrote about camp, and we understand that camp has tremendous value, and there are many lessons that are taught through camp. And personally, I don't have kids in overnight camp yet, but I can imagine right now in my Malkim HaShlichus, we don't have an ongoing every week Shabbos minyan. Where will my kids have an opportunity to sit down and daven with a minyan on Shabbos, to learn how to follow in a Chumash, Kriyas HaTorah, things like that? This will be things that they will, as Hashem, pick up through camp, other places as well. But as someone who does not have this exposure on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis, this is a wonderful opportunity. And for everyone in your own situations, there are great values, whether it's a different format of friends, different sports opportunities, whatever it is. We each can recognize that side the ruchnis, side the gashmis, there is tremendous value. If I could just ask everyone to mute so that we can have a focused conversation. Thank you. I'll do that as well. Okay. My apologies. So there is tremendous value and there's tremendous lessons that are taught. And beyond the Gashmias, the Ruchnias, they are life skills that we give over to our children. You know, the independence, being surrounded by others of our own age, making decisions, having to make decisions are things that we should not overlook. And again, going back to my own personal experience here in my community, most of the kids are not going to overnight camp. The kids in my community, they're going to day camp, maybe a travel camp for a week or two, but their first experience with overnight, being away from home for a lengthy period of time, more than just a Shabbos or a 2-3 nights, is really going to college. And we are actually giving our children a big opportunity to learn and to grow and to gain from an experience that is perhaps fear invoking, does lead to some anxiety on our part, because it's huge to send a child away from home with all the things that could happen, knowing all the benefits and the value that is there, but there's also the fear and the concerns that might come with it. So the goal that I hope, together with Rabbi Blumstein, to share with you is how we can best communicate these ideas with our children. What does that dialogue sound like before? Maybe your child is going away this week, next week, the second month. Well, what does that look like? What does that sound like? What about during camp, when there's a challenge, when you're just trying to get information? How does that conversation sound like? What am I looking for? How do I pull out the right pieces of information? And one piece that I think is really overlooked is the after. The conversation that takes place after camp is extremely valuable as well. And we'll get into that towards the end as well, Be'ezras Hashem. So I think looking around, Googling websites, the idea that you should talk to your kids before camp is not a chiddush at all. It's not something that we all know and we all hear. But what I hope to do tonight together with Rabbi Blumstein is to break it down, how we can make that happen in the most productive and positive and helpful environment. So I'm not going to explain to you the need. I think that's obvious, and that's why we're all here. But hopefully we can go a little bit deeper and see the process. What is the best ideas that we can use? And one final pointer that I want to give is that a lot of the questions, I wouldn't say a lot, a bulk of the questions that came in, and certainly something that's on everyone's mind, is how do you prevent, how do you prepare, talk about, bring up the idea of sexual abuse in camp? And it is a serious conversation, and it's something that needs to happen in the right way, in the right time. But I will tell you that we're not covering that at length here tonight. And the reason is twofold. Number one, it's been covered by great professionals, and I'd be happy to send you recordings and resources, or Blumstein as well, of where this is covered. And if you want to have a personal conversation with me, we can arrange that. But it's been covered in a very good way, in a very chassidish way, in an appropriate way. And so I encourage you to specifically, if that is the only topic that's concerning you, then go explore it. But I will tell you that as much as that is a real issue, and chas v'shalom should ever be something that any of us deal with, there are other challenges that kids will face in camp, whether it's bullying, whether it's the pressures of peer pressure, whether it's emotional abuse. Because yes, when we look at the most severe issue that our children could face, I think most of us would say sexual abuse is our biggest fear. But the truth is that emotional abuse is a real concern as well, that can leave damage to a child, can scar them. Comments from other children can do damage as well. So there are other areas of camp that we want to cover, because that one has very correctly and appropriately been discovered and looked at. Rabbi Blumstein, any opening thoughts?
First of all, thank you for having me join an important dialogue like this. And one of the words that comes to mind immediately as we jump into this conversation is purpose, and the other word is going to be potential. What's the purpose of camp? What are we hoping camp's going to do? Which I think we're going to talk about that, because when we're, you kind of use those words prevention, I don't want to say intervention, but maybe experience, and then post-experience. How do we take what we want out of that journey? The question is, what is the journey? What's the purpose of camp? And I think we take that apart and start applying it to different components here, that becomes super important. The other word that I want to highlight as we jump into this is potential. Like anything else that has a very high stake, there's a lot invested in that stake. And I think that there's a common accepted belief, and there's probably data backing a lot of that about the potential of camp, about the great potential of camp. We can talk about why there's so much potential in camp. We talk about some of the Chassidisha and Yiddish concepts behind camp, some of the ideas that camp is almost a Jewish concept, so to speak. But with potential means there's high risks and there's high gains. And I think that's what is structuring a lot of this conversation. So I'm excited to jump into it, and thank you for having me here.
All right, thank you. So I think when we begin and talk about that conversation that we have with our children, one of the, I would say, the gift that we can give our children before camp, and I think this we'll definitely come back to this when we circle back to the end of camp, is what I would call the gift of perspective and the gift of expansion. And what do I mean by that? Let me break that down. When we are preparing our children for camp, as we would with anything, but tonight we're focused on camp, we can look at it as a checklist. Here's a whole shopping list of things that I'm concerned about, be it starting at making sure they change their socks every day, brushing their teeth, to making sure that no one touches them inappropriately, to making sure that no one makes them feel unsafe emotionally. So there's a long list, and each one of us will personalize that list based on our experiences and our own children. But we have a greater opportunity than to just walk through a checklist of things that they may or may not be able to accomplish or live up to during camp. And that gift is the idea that when we can broaden their mind about how to internalize situations that they come across. And simply put, this is the idea of a certain mature outlook, an intellectual maturity that allows them to understand that two things can be happening at the same time. Even though at first they might seem like opposites, they might seem like they are contradictory in nature. When we sit down with our children and have a proper conversation, what we're doing is we're broadening their mind and their perspective to say, you know what? I can leave home and not be put to bed by my parents for 8 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, however long camp is. And together with that, I know that they still care about me and that I'm safe and that I'm protected and they absolutely love me. That is a gift that comes along with an expansion mindset in our conversation. And we want them to be able to do that. So yes, our children might know that there's a certain element that they're being missed at home or that they're not at home, but they can have a good time. They don't have to feel guilty to have a good time in camp. They can have a different way of doing things during their camp experience, whether it's playing a game that they're not used to, whether it's davening more than what they're accustomed to. And at the same time, camp could still be a success and could still be a winner. So it's really important that before we even start the conversation with our children, we're asking ourselves, which areas does my child need expansion on? Where do they get very tzakratz? If a counselor tells them something, whether it's a strong instruction, stop talking during davening, or no, we're not having Laffy Taffies in bed, is my child the type of person who will shut down from that and say, now I cannot communicate with this counselor. Now that this bacher or girl has told me that I cannot do X, Y, and Z, so now I cannot connect to them in any way. If this is an issue that your child has, whether it's from school, other years of camp, then your best opportunity is to have a conversation that expands their mindset, that says, this person who Tati and Mami have entrusted your care with for the summer may say or do something that you're not comfortable with in that sense, whether because you don't like it, doesn't fit with your agenda at the time because you want candy, or you want to continue doing an activity or so on, or you want to call me and they don't let. And together with that, you can understand that they are still good and they can still give you a good time and you can still come to them with other concerns that you have. So it's hard for me to sit here and give you specific examples because I don't want to make them up. But the fact is we know our kids and we should know them and we can understand which parts they struggle with and which areas may make them shut down. And if we can identify areas that make them shut down, then we can start expanding. So if a child hates one part of camp, color war, it's too chaotic, it's too much going on, it's a mess, then our job pre-summer is to be able to explain to them that although those 2 days or 3 days are not your favorite, they are not what has to shape your summer. You can still enjoy the swimming, you can still enjoy the learning, the friends, the canteen, the trips, and whatever else you would like. So goal number one of any conversation that we're having pre-camp is what perspective am I instilling in my child? What approach to challenges in camp do my children have, and how can I shift that so that they don't feel tied to it, so they don't feel enslaved by the idea, and they can see things from a different perspective. So the first step in doing that is to ask yourself, what is my goal here? What are the areas that I am concerned about? And I should have those goals which are realistic in my head. And then how can I share that idea with clarity and with confidence? And better yet, what real life examples of my own child, myself in my childhood, others that I may be associated with, what real life examples can I demonstrate to my children or my child so that he or she can feel comfortable with the topic that I just brought up? So I'll give you an example, what I mean by that. It was the end of the year, and I was talking to my son, 8 years old, discussing some areas of the year. And it was a very comfortable setting, and I knew that what I wanted to hear was about his social skills. That was an area that I wanted to cover. And through the conversation, what we discovered was that there was a word and an idea that he was not yet familiar with, and that was peer pressure, because he started talking about something that somebody else was doing who said, make sure you don't tell anyone else about it. And what was interesting is that I was able, together with my wife at that point, to start introducing him to words that may have never been introduced to his vocabulary. So peer pressure and secrets and things like that, and the ability to feel comfortable to share these with Tati and Mami at any time. And you don't have to worry about repercussions that might come from it because you're doing the right thing, the safe thing. So because we had this goal, we were able to cover a very, very important topic. And Hashgacha Pratis, you talk about peer pressure is Kalev Ben Yefuna is the ultimate example of how we stand up to peer pressure. It's always nice to tie it into Torah, to Parsha, to real life stories that you can that your children can understand and express. So I believe that when we are clear in our own head, in our own mind of what our goal is, and perhaps an area that our child might be weaker in, what is my goal? What language will I share that with? And ultimately, how will I give them clear expectations of what they can and can't do? And I'm going to break that down in some more detail. But before I do, I think there is an important area that I'm going to ask Rabbi Blumstein to cover. And that is, how do I draw up those goals? How do I decide what my expectations are? Because ultimately, we're sending our kids away. And that act is an act of trust. However much research you did or didn't do, however much choice there really is among Lubavitcher camps, the fact is you're placing them in the care of this camp. That is an act of trust, which means things will not necessarily go the way you would run your home, and the levels of hygiene may not be the way you approve, and many things may not be the way you approve. So there's an important word that really is at the basis of the conversation, and that is expectation. So I'm going to ask Rabbi Blumstein to touch on that a little bit, because before we even start, we need to know what our expectations are, or are we just dumping an impossible load on our children?
It's a great introduction there, and more than introduction, there was so much information there to take apart. So thank you, Rabbi Chaiton. Talking about expectations for a minute, I once heard the phrase, expectations are predetermined disappointments. And we think about that for a second, we start thinking about what are we expecting from our camps. And, I've seen a spread over the years. Obviously, I've had my own expectations of camp. And I've seen this idea that somehow camp is going to magically fix my kid, where I'm going to send my kid and they're going to come back different. Or I know that my child is struggling with certain things, but somehow they just won't struggle at camp. Maybe my kid's been happy at camp for a long time. It's been their happy spot, and they had a really rough year this past year, or maybe a couple of years, depending on how the pandemic hit the general area. And I'm just hoping they go back to the way they were at camp. And I think some of those things sometimes really don't play out the way that we're hoping for, where things just kind of go and flow, and we're just banking on having that amazing life-changing counselor. And if the system isn't in place, that we're really put in a tough spot with our kid. I was dealing just today with a camp that the parents are on a med switch that's being advised by obviously doctors and the whole framework, but they didn't tell the camp. And they were hoping the kid would just do well at camp, which I think we're going to cover soon. When and what do we dialogue with camp? But I think we start with expectations. The question is, what are we hoping to get out of camp? It goes back to purpose. What's the purpose of camp? Obviously in Chassidus, we know from the Tanya, the mission statement of the book, it says right in the front what this book is hoping to cover. And I think if we have to sit down and we have to pare down what we're hoping to get out of camp, what is important to us from camp, if we had to take down to bare bones, what would make it worth it for us to send our kid there this summer, that is going to be important to hold on to pick our battles over, and to communicate to the camp. This is why I'm sending my kid to camp. I once heard a parable analogy, I'm sure you all heard it or saw it, about this professor that comes into class and he's got his jar and he puts rocks until the jar is full, and then he says the jar is full, and the class said yes, and then he pours in pebbles and they say, oh, now it's full, and then he pours in sand, filling all the cracks and crevices. And he goes and he tells the class, the sand, there's always room for. The sand's negotiable. But if you put in the rocks last, there won't be room for rocks. And there's many other parables, analogies that go in the same framework, but what's your rocks? What are your core expectations from camp? You got to have those front and center. And then you got to think about the other things. Is it food? Is that the core expectation of camp, to make sure that my kid's fed, that they have a canteen that can satisfy their every whim and desire that they never even thought about? Or is it something more? And how do we make sure those things are communicated? So I do think it's a good starting point, because that's what a lot of the dialogue's based about. Back at you, Rabbi Chaiton.
Excellent. And you know what? I think there's no reason that we can to shake it up a bit and go for that question. It's a tough question, one that we discussed, on our own. But the question really is, I know my kid has a challenge, and that spectrum of challenge is broad. Could be from a small, seemingly insignificant challenge to a very large one, whether it's a temperament issue to a medicational issue. But what is my responsibility as a parent and to my child in regards to telling the camp information? Do we say, figure out on your own, and the consequences, let them come as they come? Or should I tell the camp? Now, I don't think there's a magical formula that we can answer that question with, because ultimately, camp is a place where there's a limited amount of kids accepted, and you don't want to jeopardize the opportunity for your child to have that experience and all the benefits that can come out of it. But ultimately, unfortunately, I can talk from my experience, and I know to go on a limb to assume that you can as well, Rabbi Blumstein, that you've met situations where a child's problems became such a big issue, and then it was a real challenge. It was a forest fire that the camp had to deal with, as opposed to having known some basic information at first, which again is a tough decision, because am I jeopardizing my child, but then again prevents much heartache and challenge going down the line. So it's a back and forth, and there's no golden rule. But what I will say is, what I have found, being involved with both the parents and teachers and camps and parents, is that if the issue is what we would call a regular issue, but just something that flares up. So a child, let's just say a child who gets very anxious before bedtime. They just don't like going to sleep. There are kids like that, and they just have a very hard time. They just can't settle. They're not trying to be mischievous. They're not trying to be chutzpahdik. They're not trying to make trouble, but they just can't settle in bed. And bedtime at home is a struggle. So add on all the dynamics of camp and all the ices and popcorn they probably just consumed, it doesn't make the situation better, and being away from home also. So a situation like that, where is absolutely not a reason why a child shouldn't be accepted to camp. So you ask yourself, what benefits will my child get by me telling this to the appropriate party? And we can discuss who that is, and each camp will probably have their own policy as well. But let's just say, for the sake of this story example, it's the counselor. Will my child gain more if I share this information with this teenage bacher or girl, or will they lose out more? Will this, this Mendy who's 18 years old now say, oh goodness, I have this child to deal with. What a headache, what a pain. I'm just going to yell at him. I'm just going to punish him. Or will I gain? So in order to answer that, I flip it around and say, what would I like to know? As an adult under the who is responsible and given other people's children to care for, in any situation, what would help me? So number one, communication, I think, is important, sharing it. But number two, let's put it like this. Your child is going to camp. And as Rabbi Blumstein said, most of the issues are not new to camp. So you're dealing with this at home. So you probably have some type of coping strategy. You've seen things that work. I believe that you gain more by sharing with this Bacher, Mendy, Chana, whatever the name is, by sharing with them a challenge, but not saying, enjoy, here's the challenge, maybe a nice tip on the side with it, but by sharing with them ideas that can work. Now, our job is not to sit here and lecture and teach and go on and on to the staff member. But if I can say, this works, this type of language works, expect this, and this is what you can do, I think you're setting your child up for success. And I don't think in that situation, you're jeopardizing at all. So obviously be sensible, be responsible about what you're sharing, what's necessary. But ask yourself, will my child gain more if I provide clarity of the situation and also working tools that this bacher, girl, or head counselor, director can use in helping my child have a more successful summer? And then an opportunity to be open to hearing feedback, because we shouldn't be surprised if our child is acting in a certain way if they act like that the whole year. So allowing the camp to know that you're open to hear that feedback and hear how it's going and giving them that support. By doing that, I think you're setting up your child for success as opposed to not. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Rabbi.
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back and forth. I know we had this dialogue before and walking everyone through that back and forth. I'm currently running a camp, and I tell my counselors every day, I'm running a camp for kids with special needs. And I tell my counselors every day, if there's something that a parent will call me up and say, why didn't you tell me that? I'd rather tell them that. Because you know what? We can all delete information we don't need to know, but to tell a parent that, to hold back information from a parent and them saying, that was really important information, that's counterintuitive. And I think the flip side works the other way for camps. I mean, you think about some of the information that's being held back from camps at times. I got a phone call once that a camp didn't know that a child was struggling with suicidality. And that's important information. They have to gear up for that. They have to plan for that. They have to make a plan around that. Now, does that mean they may not accept one's child to camp if they don't know that? That's a concern. That's a risk. That's a fear. But the fear that they were dealing with when they called me was trying to keep the kids safe. And they were in a pinch because they didn't have the resources they needed when they needed them. What would have happened had they known? And then we go into more minor situations, or I don't want to aggregate people's needs or anything else, but we talk about anxiety by bed, where maybe a little transition will help. Hey, there's 10 minutes till bedtime. Or maybe giving the child a little bit of space or a little bit of a routine might get them through bedtime. If they're not able to provide that, is that where you want your kid for the summer? Like if they come back to you and say, hey, your kid's too needy for our camp, that's a great thing to weed out now, because if your kid is going to be identified as a kid who is a problem by bedtime, are you going to hit your needs this summer? Whatever those rocks, those core needs, those expectations for camp, are you going to hit them there? Obviously, it doesn't feel good to know that my kid's a needs-based kid that can't perform in this camp. But it's also the camp's way of saying I can't service that. And if they can't service your basic needs, are you going to call them and say, I need my money back because you guys are giving my child a horrible summer? And that also goes back to the first ingredient where we started with. The potential of camp is huge. But just like the potential for camp can be hugely positive, it can be hugely negative. And I think that's where communication, which Chaiton's talking about here, is so key. Now, there's a couple of things to think about with that as we expand communication. How do we say what we say? First of all, it's what do we say? The next thing is, how do we say it? And the third thing is, who do we say it to? Those are key ingredients as we start talking to camp about needs. Some of us try to slip things below the director's radar and just get it to the counselor and be like, hey, counselor, here's my number in case you need anything. And by the way, here's the tip. Don't ever let the director know that we're talking. And then sometimes we're just trying to tell the director, when the director's like, I've got a couple hundred kids here, and like your request that I get the extra candy for the kid, like, and I think that goes into who we're telling. How we're telling is also important. Which I think primarily, if you're talking to a counselor, first of all, recognize what they're doing. They're working hard. Most of them, for the word pay would be a joke. And how are we supporting that? To get on the phone and be like, I'm really glad I got your number. It took me about 3 days to get a hold of you. And by the way, my kid's been complaining and this is going on, which immediately puts a counselor in defensive mode. Oh, you're that parent. So now we're trying to get something accomplished here where like they're going to go out of the way to take extra care of our kid versus, having a couple compliments for them. Supporting the fact that they're probably doing a great job. Hey, I got off with my kid and they told me this about what you're doing. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate the time you're putting into my kid. It means a lot to me. There's something I wanted to point out. I don't know if this could be helpful or not. I know sometimes my kid's a picky eater and it's important that they eat, because if they don't, their best behavior doesn't always show up. And I want to team up with you and see what we could do to get them through meals better so that you can have more of an impact on my kid's life. It's a very different message. Again, I think Rabbi Chaiton started with, it's assessing the need. Is this, I like how you put it, more of a typical, I don't know what typical need would look like anymore, but is this an extreme need where we need director's eyes on this? Eating disorders, suicidality, the list goes on from there about things that we really need the right people's eyes on. And with the right game plan, they could be successful. I was supporting a camp with a camper where the parent told the camp, you can't kick my kid out. They failed so much and now you're going to make them fail again. This could destroy them. And the camp's response was, why didn't you tell us this when we took them? Why are you telling us now? We don't have the resources. And I don't know what would have happened if they told initially. And I think that'll open a very sensitive dialogue. What would have happened initially? But when we're at where we're at, I think part of that question becomes is, what are we, like, how are we still taking that conversation now? So passing it back to you, but just some food for thought.
Absolutely, and thank you for kind of getting in the mind of the teenager a little bit, because that's helpful to see their perspective. So I think summing up what we're saying here is that before we even start the conversation with our kids, the work is on us. And I know that I say this when I'm talking to parents and teachers, and not everyone likes to hear it because we're trying to get the work on everybody else. But the truth is, the work really does begin with us as parents, making these assessments, making these judgment calls, being honest, being fair. And I'll just close this section, and please, your questions, flood the box. Happy to answer them at the end and hear your thoughts, maybe real experiences, that you can share that will be helpful, obviously anonymously to others as well. But just to, I think to close off this section, think about when disappointment is easier to handle and when it is more difficult. When is a child going to be more devastated and broken? Is it that they weren't accepted to a camp, or that in middle of a camp they were labeled, identified, or sent home, chas v'shalom? And the answer, of course, is before camp you have much more control, because doing things smartly, your child may never know that there was rejection, that there was conversation about their behavior, contingencies, all those types of things. So maybe it feels better to just let it go and see what happens and daven for hatzlacha. But ask yourself when more damage will happen. And of course, without question, more damage will happen if the situation blows up in the middle of camp, because then you really can't control it. You can't control what other kids are saying. You can't control what the directors are saying, what the staff members are saying. And now your child essentially has a target on his back or her back, which can impede and influence the future summers as well. So I think these are tough questions, but hopefully this little section, this conversation can open your mind to areas that are worth exploring. And again, it's not only about the suicide. I know suicide is extreme, and I'm happy it was mentioned, but there are smaller things as well, which we might call regular, more traditional, which are worth thinking about very much in your own time, with a spouse, with your child as necessary. All right. So if there's any thoughts or feedback on that, please share it, or we're gonna move on. So once we have identified these goals, these positive moments that we're looking to achieve from camp, what is the next step that really happens as I prepare my child for camp? And I think that is to recognize that my anxieties and fears are not to be let out on my child. Very much, I can feel so anxious that my child is away from home and who knows how they're doing. But that cannot become my child's anxiety. If I'm having a challenge because my child left home, or I'm worried about how he's going to do socially, then you find somebody to talk to, a mashpia, a friend, a family member, a therapist, whatever it takes. And I don't say that lightly, but your anxieties and fears should not become your child's. And if you're going to walk into the conversation trying to give over all your deepest concerns from all the articles and horror stories that you've read, then you really are not setting up your child for success, to say it mildly. Okay, so let's move past that. So you're sitting down and you've identified an area that they struggle with, that you are concerned about, and you've thought it through. So the first thing we want to do is, let's say the child says, I don't like color war, or I don't like breakfast in camp, or I don't like swimming, I'm scared of the pool. The number one thing that we don't want to do is that we don't want to dismiss them. We don't want to say that, oh no, you'll love it. Once you get there, it's going to be amazing. And you'll see, you always get into it and you'll have such a good time. And you're not really scared of swimming. You're just saying that now. Because by dismissing them, we're sending them into the dark. We didn't address their concern. By telling them how much they're going to love it doesn't emotionally prepare them for camp. So step number one is don't respond with a dismissive attitude. Rather, prep them with practical solutions. So if a child is scared of swimming, you don't have to force them to swim. You can tell them that, you can always change your mind. You can always say, you know what, I'm happy to try it. I'm happy to jump in the pool and see how it feels, but you don't have to. And no one should ever force you to go swimming, and no one should push you in. And, maybe you can go over to the counselor and play a game on the side. Maybe you can take a walk with a friend and so on. But never dismiss it simply because either you know that your child will get into it, because you just know they complained before, but they get into it later. But your dismissive nature is what will ring with them, and that is unhelpful. So think of a practical way, a practical solution you can give them while addressing that. The second thing that you don't want to do is save them. So a child who's homesick, let's say, and is concerned about that, and there's nothing wrong with being homesick. We shouldn't think these are conditions that are terrible. It's a very normal thing. Your child feels happy, secure, and connected at home. It kind of makes sense that you would miss home. Even us as adults, when we're away from home, we feel a bit different, whatever it is, each according to their own nature. But feeling different away from home is normal. So a homesick child is not as a side note, I say this, but homesickness is not something to be afraid of. It's something that needs to be dealt with appropriately. But again, not dismissing it. And so what we shouldn't do is save them. So for example, if your child says, oh, I'm going to miss you, and it's such a long ride to camp or a flight to camp, and you say, don't worry, the minute you get to camp, you're going to have a phone and you're going to call me and I'm going to know you're safe. You know what the problem with that is? Who said that's true? Who said that the minute they get to camp, they're going to have access to a phone? Who said the minute they get to camp, they're going to be able to buy nash because that's going to put away their fear of of being homesick, things like that. So saving them is number one, and there's two parts here. Number one, it doesn't prepare them for real life because we can't always manipulate the situation. We don't know who the counselor is going to be. You don't know if he will have this automatic connection to your child. Maybe not. Maybe he'll just do his job by habit, but he doesn't have a real connection. Maybe you can't control that. Hopefully everything goes well. But by offering a saving mentality, what you're doing is you're denying them the opportunity to grow from real life experiences. No, you're not going to win every game. No, you might not win color war. No, the grand trip, it might be a little rainy and some of the rides that you really love might be closed. It could happen. You're not going to fly down to Six Flags and operate the rides for them. Also, if you are promising them solutions that you can't deliver, what is going to happen in the moment? So here you have a child expecting, and I heard this from a director. He says he had kids crying the very first day of camp because the parents said, you're going to have a phone to call me. And it wasn't the case. You can't. So it's better to be honest and tell them, you know what, calling in camp is a little bit different. You don't just have a phone at your every whim and every moment. There's a set time and a place to do that. And telling them that they could get every bit of nash and that you'll change their bunk if they don't like it and you'll change their learning teacher if you don't like it. No, that is not helpful. Now, it might get you through the moment. It might get you through the tantrum or the fear in the moment, in the conversation. So now your child's crying. Don't worry, if you don't like your counselor, I'll switch your bunk. So you've succeeded if you're looking at it as a checklist. But if we're looking to nurture our children from a place of connection, that's very, very dangerous, because you're basically, again, just dumping the issue on the camp, and you're going to leave them with a very sour and a very negative experience because you've promised them something that you can't deliver. The next point is that we shouldn't be ignoring it. Sometimes we think that it's 3 days till camp. I could just ignore it. They'll get on the bus and everything's just going to be fine because they'll be in camp. And so if I just ignore it by not addressing it, and again, you're not helping anyone, because what's your child going to do when faced with those very real challenges that they might have, that you're aware of, or maybe that they have voiced and you didn't take seriously? Final point, what we shouldn't be doing is don't get angry. Don't place an emotional charged toll on your child to just figure it out. You'll be fine. I'm telling you, just listen to me. Stop bringing up these problems. Kids have been going to camp for hundreds of years, and people and thousands of campers have been enjoying it. So stop worrying so much. Stop kvetching. You know what I'm doing to get you to camp? You know how many kids are on the waiting list and we pushed you in? You'll be fine. Again, responding with anger is not helping them, because what are they going to do in the place of the real situation? It just leaves them feeling anxious, because here I am being told that I'm not allowed to feel this way, and hayatachin that I'm concerned, but the reality is I am. And that's exactly what goes on in a child's mind. They're anxious. So what we want to do is we want to use what we might call an empathetic approach. An empathetic approach. Now, usually we talk about empathy in an emotionally charged moment when there's a situation going on. A child is upset, child is disappointed, but we can also apply the logic of empathy beforehand. We can use it to counter and sort of predict what might come to be. And one of the basic levels of empathy is to notice and to identify and recognize the fear. So a child is afraid of swimming. We want to verbalize what that fear actually is. Let them feel it, let them live it. And that way you can help them overcome it. So you're identifying it by giving it a name, by giving it a clear foundation. Remember, you're not letting it frame their entire camp, because we're expanding their perspective. But in this situation, you are clearly identifying it. You're afraid. What happened? Why are you afraid? What is your fear? You're afraid that you're going to slip. You're afraid that you're not going to have enough time to change. You're afraid that people are going to laugh at you. What is the fear? And then you can acknowledge that fear by understanding it, acknowledging that, yes, being embarrassed is uncomfortable, and I can understand why I don't want to go swimming. Here's a solution. Here's what you can try. Here's what you can do. Here's what you could think about. And when you're ready, you'll go right ahead. You're feeling homesick. Why are you feeling homesick? Because you don't like being away from Tati and Mommy. Okay. So that fear of what might happen is something that you can address and acknowledge it, that you don't want to feel empty inside, missing Tati and Mommy. So there are things that we can do. You could write a letter, write a diary. You can, have a family picture in your suitcase. You can try to talk to your counselor if it's an appropriate way. So what I'm doing is I'm identifying with the issue. I'm recognizing, acknowledging it, but I'm also trying to give it some boundaries. Not just I'm scared, but after I've identified the fear, the nervousness, the anger, whatever it might be, I'm giving it some parameter with some practical tools that can happen. So I'm letting them sit with their feeling because I want them to identify it. I'm not giving them unrealistic expectations of what I might do for them and what they can do. I'm giving them, to the best of my knowledge, what I can do. And again, going back to the fact that there are people in camp who you can trust, who we are entrusting your care with, and therefore you'll feel comfortable. So I don't know the solution to every problem, and you discuss it and you try to figure it out. But there's things that led to this, problems that may have happened. we're not probing for issues, and I'll expand on that in a moment. But what we want to do is we want to use examples. Has a similar situation happened? Maybe they did go swimming once and something happened. Maybe they had an overnight that didn't go very well. And so by using their real life experiences, by acknowledging it, identifying it, and then trying to give it as they would say in Chassidus, giving it some form, some shape, we're actually able to address it in a practical and helpful manner. Rabbi Blumstein, anything that is on your mind as I go on and on?
I love that approach. It identifies so many necessitative points. And one of them, just one of the ones I want to highlight, is that there's several studies on the form of anxiety and what's causing anxiety, the increase in anxiety. And one study wants to tag anxiety as the weakening of the muscle of problem solving. And that one of the tools to address anxiety is actually the problem solve through challenges. And what we're seeing in America is a lot of times a child has anxiety and we want to solve the anxiety. So we step in with the solutions. We step in and say, it's going to be okay. We'll do whatever it takes to make it okay. You don't need to be anxious. Versus stepping in with the support, the love, the belonging, the unconditional belief in our child, and allowing them to struggle through that problem-solving process. And going back to that kid getting off the bus, and we can say, hey, it's going to be okay. If you need anything, call me. If you don't call me, I'll call the director, and then I'm going to call the director's uncle, and then I'm going to call the person related to the uncle. I'm going to get on the phone. But what we're doing then is, while maybe we're in the moment creating a blanket of safety, we're actually, according to at least that study, a couple of other studies I've seen, we're feeding into and increasing the anxiety. Versus, you're going to get on a bus, let me listen to you, the power of listening. The average person receives about 15 minutes of undivided attention a day. So we can give our child 5 minutes of undivided attention. That's already a third of their day, to listen to their fears, to embrace, to be okay with not being okay, to listen to them struggle, and then to invest in their worth. Hey, that sounds really scary. You're going to get on a bus, you're not going to know anybody there. I believe in you. I trust you. I love you. I care about you. No matter what you're going through, you're going to be on my mind. I'm excited to see what you come up with. Now, there's got to be a chasm there. You're not going to drop them off a cliff, so to speak, and be like, hey, figure everything out. Why don't you find your own camp and pay for it too? I trust you and care about you. But to allow them to take some steps and to make some mistakes and to learn from those experiences, and then to support them from a distance where we're not solving all the messes they create. That's part of camp. Individuality, self-expression, experience, giving them that space. The other thing it communicates, which problem solving does not communicate, is that they can do this, that they're good enough. When we do step in and solve someone's problems, we step in, we're saying, you can't do this, so I need to do this for you. That's our sub-messaging to our child. You really are a problem, and therefore you need me to be the solution. Like Rabbi Chaiton said, we should make sure that our anxieties don't express in our child. And maybe our anxieties isn't our kid going to camp. Maybe our anxieties isn't our kid. Maybe our anxieties is a little bit of unfortunate embarrassment about who our kid is compared to other kids. Or maybe our anxieties run deeper, that our kid maybe can't make it through camp, which these are real anxieties. That's not what we want to be portraying to our kid. We want to be empowering them with belonging, empowering them with investment, self-worth, belief. Hey, it's going to be up and down. Swimming's going to be hard. What works for you? Let me listen to your brainstorming here, and then ending with support, encouragement and support. I'm sure you'll do a great job. I'm sure you'll make the right choices for what makes you happy. Going back to what we're building with goals and expectations for camp, it's interesting because there was a couple of counselors talking to me once how they knew the parent of the kid really wanted the kid to play sports. And I said, in this case, it was Lubavitch camp. I said, the parent didn't even send the kid with sneakers. I don't know that sports is on the top of the list. I think there's other things the parent wanted more. But they said the kid told us, and the parent told us, that's the only thing we heard about was sports. I was very intrigued by it. Are we getting through what's the most important thing? Does our kid know what's the most important thing is? Does the camp know it? Because if our kid thinks swimming is the most important thing and they failed swimming, they might have think they failed the summer. And maybe swimming isn't that important. Maybe the kid hanging out with a counselor on the side and building a connection, a relationship with a safe, trusted adult. Hopefully this workshop isn't talking about the word safe means, but hopefully the person's safe. Because if so, that trusted adult may change their life. We may get what we wanted all along. And then the question was, worth picking the fight over something? So again, I love where you're going with this angle about empathy. There's a great piece about the difference between compassion and empathy. Am I standing outside of the pit talking down to you about the pit you're going through? Or do I climb down into the pit and say, yeah, I agree with you. It's pretty dark and scary down here. That's empathy, connecting with them, not solving it for them, not pulling them out of it, but being there in the moment with them. And camp offers an opportunity to have connection with our child, which is so powerful. We hear these trend words which have real depth to them. One of them is resilience, another one's grit. How do we build this in our kid? How do we get our kid through the challenges of tomorrow? Connection, belonging, listening. I love where you're going with this, but back at you.
Right. No, all great, important points. And yeah, the terminology that I like to use is coaching. What I think of as a coach is someone who's intimately involved with every detail of the game, but they're never picking up the bat. They're never kicking the ball. That is only the players can do that. You can guide them, tell them, practice with them, but ultimately it's the player who is going to do the actual action, and the coach can only watch and support on the sideline. They've given it all they can in the moment. It's up to the player to perform. You talk about the message of saving. Very much we see this in classrooms, and I'm going on a tangent here, but I think it's important, is a teacher who's struggling will naturally call the principal to step in and discipline their classroom. And the message there is very clear. The teacher is not in control of the classroom, and therefore they need an outsider to do it. So you're actually sidestepping and degrading the authority of the teacher and giving it over to the principal. And that in itself is not helpful for the growth of that own teacher. It's his or her classroom. They have to own it. They have to figure out a way to grow within that challenge. Just an anecdote on the side, you talk about, maybe not doing the main activity and chatting on the side. So I could think of a 17-year-old bacher who didn't choose to go skydiving and instead was speaking to one of his staff members. So that would be me. I was too scared of skydiving, and I think you were too. I don't remember, but then we were chatting as the daredevils were doing the jump. But we had a good time chatting in the South African bushveld, as they say. So yes, you don't have to go skydiving to have a great summer. There's a lot of other things that can happen as well. So yeah, I just to bring us back together here, what we just covered was a very important topic, and that is the raising the concerns that our children are raising. So number one, recognizing what our anxieties are and not allowing that to become my children's anxiety. Number two, what are my children's anxieties? What are they raising? What concerns are they bringing up? Before you go to the dentist, the kids are scared. What are they telling me? What am I hearing? Whether it's official conversation or just in the car, or over the supper table, or to siblings, what am I picking up on and how am I going to address it? So again, we're not dismissing, we're not getting emotionally angry at them, we're not ignoring it, and we're not saving them. We're doing the empathy approach. We might harachamim, ultimate being there with them through their situation. But then there is also the issues that me as a parent, you as a parent, identify as things that you want to talk to your child about, and not things that they're scared of, not things that they're aware of. How do we have that conversation as well? So that is also very important, because your child may never raise it. And just as an example, this is where the conversation of sexual abuse comes in, and emotional abuse and peer pressure and bullying, and the list of things that concern me as a parent who knows my child best. So what do we do? So number one, we're prepared. It's these things. We can't convince ourselves that we're going to get through these conversations just because I'm just going to get through it. It doesn't work like that. These are things that really take thought. You're laying down important, life-changing ideas to your child. They don't just happen by itself. And I want to point out something that Chassidus really emphasizes, and that is Olam HaMachshava, Moichin. The world of intellect and the world of speech are very different. What makes perfect sense up here in my mind, and I can even be saying it so clearly in my mind, may not come out clearly at all in my speech. There's an idea. There's so many times I've prepared a lecture, a class, whatever it might be, and it made so much sense here, but I was a little bit underprepared. And when I deliver it, I just feel like, hey, where did all those beautiful ideas that I had up here, how come it didn't come out? I knew it word for word in my head. Because there's a big difference between the way it's in machshava and the way it comes out in olam hadibur, in the actual creation, the world. And so we cannot assume that we will just know what to say and how to say it appropriately if we don't give it the preparation that it deserves. So number one, be prepared. Prepare yourself. What is too much? What is enough information? How are you going to say it? What terminology are you comfortable using in your home? Number two is, what is my goal? What ultimately am I trying to get my child to do? So you're giving them a lot of information. You're telling them that there are bullies out there. You're telling them that there are, unfortunately, people who are challenged with what they touch. So what's my goal? To scare them so that they don't fall into that situation? Or is there usable information? Like, for example, don't be in a room one-on-one with someone who is an adult. Or, for example, if a child says something that is hurtful, tell somebody about it. Not to just be scared of bullies. So you want to give them an actionable item to do, because we all do better with to-dos and actionable items, but especially kids who you've just brought them into a new world, a new reality. What can they actually do about this information? What can they do with it? The final point is the comfort level. When you're talking about these sensitive issues, and they're all sensitive, and I don't only mean sexual abuse, they're all sensitive. Bullying is sensitive. Emotional abuse is sensitive. Verbal abuse is sensitive. They're all sensitive topics. We have to be comfortable. And again, this falls a little bit off the preparation. We have to be comfortable. We have to know what we're saying. We have to be comfortable with what we're saying. And it can't just be a fidgety looking away, no eye contact. And that is why the setting is very, very important. The timing is very important. And your absolute presence is very important. If you want your child to take this conversation absolutely seriously, then you need to show them that this is absolutely serious. In the middle of Shemona Esrei, we're not on our phones, we're not distracted, because we take Shemona Esrei very, very seriously. When we are sitting down with our child to give them something very important, they can tell if our mind is there, if this is really important to Tati and Mommy. If there's a presence and there's a comfort level, the information is automatically better received, because their own emotional defenses go away. Because this is a place where I want to be, I feel comfortable, it's not awkward, it's not a place that I want to run away from. Anything that you want to add on that?
Yeah, for sure. That was great. Two things I want to add, which are just things to think about. One is, and I like to stress this so much to especially our coming up youth and teens, the power that our kids can tell us anything, that openness, being like, I don't know what's going to go on in camp, and I'm not here to, necessarily solve it for you, but I want to know about it. Just tell me about it. And if you don't feel comfortable telling me, can we together identify somebody that you would feel comfortable talking to? That component of teaching them, especially from a young age, that there's nothing they can't tell you, or giving them a code word. We use code words in our camp a lot. Hey, if you have to tell me something where you don't want me to parent you through that, say a code word, say pineapple before you start. And just let me know that my job is to just be the listening ears. Now, it doesn't mean that, if your kid says that they're, I don't know, God forbid, doing heavy drugs in camp, you're probably going to step and create safety. But creating a space where they can tell you, starting from sexual abuse, going into bullying, going into some of the frameworks that we're scared of, knowing that they can set up a safe place just to tell you whatever it is super important. And if it's not you, working together to identify who they can tell. And I wouldn't wait for the crisis to do that. I would start educating now, because whether it's camp or somewhere else in life, the tool alone is ensuring of mental health development and growth. So whether they ever need it, God forbid they should never need it, please God, they should never need it. It alone builds who they are. The second thing to think about, switching gears for a second, it's interesting because in the world of special needs, we see this all the time, and it works so well for all of us. Building social stories around camp. You can do it online. You can do it with paper and pictures. You can write a story. You can, I'm sure there's so many versions. There's all these Jewish books that come out from Achai called I Go to the Doctor, I Go to the Dentist, I Go to the Supermarket, I Go to Shul. You can make your book called I Go to Camp, and you can walk them through the journey of camp. And you can highlight the parts of camp that you think your child's going to struggle through. And you can guide them through this story to using different approaches and tools. If bedtime is hard for them, we can use a social story framework to walk them through bedtime. It's going to be okay. Some kids might roll our eyes at you and they'll still listen. We all do. We all still listen. But it's taken, and even if they're older and they're in a framework where they're not going to go for the social story, dialogue it. Hey, I just want to talk you through camp. I know, I'm the parent. I know you're going to roll your eyes at me and be like, hey, Ta, get over it. But humor me. Give me 15 minutes. So this is what's going to happen in camp. It starts building their thought processes. Brains are pathways. There's a lot of building repetition into the pathways to create patterns and experiences and outcomes. And we can help frame some of that by building them their stories and their frameworks beforehand, which for all these things, for all these greater fears, there's things that we can do to lay a framework that if needed, they could tap into. So I, again, really love the topics you're bringing up.
Great, good. Thank you. That I like that. What I like to call predictability, walking it through is very valuable and identifies concerns as well. So again, if you have any questions, please keep putting them in the chat. I don't know if they are coming in or not, but there's a lot of information, and I hope we can have some interaction at the end as we come slowly towards the the closing segment, which is the after camp. So we touched on before. We also touched on what is going on during camp a little bit at the beginning. Rabbi Blumstein mentioned about how we are talking to these hardworking staff members. I just want to go there a little bit more because I think there is value in that element. Although, yes, let's be honest, the during camp episodes we have the least control over, and I think that's an important expectation to keep in mind as well. That choosing camp means that we are again accepting the fact that we trust them to deal with issues. Now, that doesn't mean they always come through. That doesn't mean that every camp's communication is perfect, and I'm sure we can all share stories both ways. But the framework that we have to begin from is that the camp is going to deal with it responsibly. That's just the trust that they deserve from us as parents sending our kids to camp. So that tells us that timing and our method of communication is very important. Yes, of course, if I find out that my child got a grazed knee, to me, that might be life-stopping, especially my kid is hundreds of miles away. Yes, I'm at home in New Jersey, and I find out that my kid in wherever across the country, on the West Coast, got a grazed knee. To me, the world should stop. Absolutely. And no parent should be criticized for feeling that way. But let's remind ourselves what's going on in camp. As we said, there's hundreds of kids. A grazed knee is a situation. The child is probably crying and maybe gets homesick. But a grazed knee is not something that we should be telling camp to stop everything and cancel the schedule, and the director should give us our undivided attention. Yes, it should be reported. Yes, they should tell us what steps they took. And yes, let me know my kid is okay. But is it so bad if that happens later that evening and we're told, your child during a soccer game this afternoon grazed their knee, the EMT took care of it, we're watching, if it gets infected, so on, you want to speak to him, we think he's fine. Or maybe don't speak to him because we think it'll just raise up the issue. That is a thought process that we have to have honestly. And with that trust, the camp does deserve. And I think it's fair to say that if we give camp that trust, they reciprocate it by treating us as parents with honesty, with clarity, and with fairness. Now, that doesn't mean it's always. We're not talking 100%, but our framework has to start from that place. So thinking about timing, when and how to bring up issues is very, very important as well. Think about the end of a day of day camp, and there's a long line of pickup, and you're upset because your child didn't get 2 ices and everyone else did. Is that really the right time and place? And you might be legitimately concerned. Your child is crying, he felt left out, he felt picked on. The counselor was wrong maybe, but is getting the director's attention in the middle of the pickup line really that urgent? And I think that we have to recognize that as well. And then one of the points I said at the beginning was not giving our children the false impressions. Same thing is during camp as well. if we do speak to our children, we are communicating with them, we can't promise them things that we can't deliver. We should not be promising them things that we can't deliver on. We have to let the process of camp and that learning experience allow itself to play out. When there are issues, when the communication between camp and parents is not where it should be, we have to use seichel. And I'm going to ask Rabbi Blumstein to step in there, because I know you've been in the middle of some of these situations and you understand the mind of teenagers perhaps very well. You deal with them a lot. So I'm going to ask you to step in. What can a parent do who does feel like camp has been unresponsive? The counselor is not responding. The counselor is giving cryptic messages. I had a parent call me up, tell me, my kid is in day camp. He's, third, fourth grade. And the counselor, I asked him how he's doing, and the counselor replied, he's doing okay, but he's a little bit annoying when he tries to talk to me. What's a parent supposed to think about that? What does it mean my child is annoying? Is he hurting you? Well, what's going on? And it turned out to be the child just was a little shy and didn't communicate clearly. And the counselor just didn't really respond well to the parents. So I'm going to ask you to jump in. Give us some insight. Again, it's not a magical formula, but what ideas, what steps can be taken that you've seen, that you've been involved in, that can help a parent who is struggling? Again, we give the camp the opportunity to prove themselves, and I hope most do, but there's always that exception.
It's funny, your examples brings to mind a story that I was guiding a camp a few years ago, and I remember the camp was out on a trip. It was a day camp. The camp was out on a trip, and a tornado happened near where the trip was. And the likelihood and everything else, but the camp created safety. They kept this group of kids safe through a tornado. It made the news. It was crazy, and the camp got back, and these counselors were beaming that they had safety and they had kids coming back. They even made it on time for dismissal. And one kid lost their shoes in the turmoil of keeping everyone safe. And the parent lost it at the counselor, screaming and shouting, "How could you lose my kid's shoes?" Which the camp had already planned. After camp, they were going to go drive there and get the shoes. And I remember listening to the story and being like, these counselors went out of their way to make sure that your kid was safe through a tornado. They didn't plan that. They're not getting a bonus because of that. Your kid came up, with no shoes. What would you have done if the tornado would have hit, or if they would have been less professional? Like, who would have cared about the shoes at that point? You talk about the freeze pops, talk about these examples. It's just important to realize that there's probably a lot. Now, it doesn't change anything. You're a customer, you want to get service, you want to make sure your kid gets taken care of. But do we know the story? Do we know the scope of what's going on? Sometimes, probably on some sort of parent WhatsApp group, we're like, oh, my kid got the lazy counselor this summer. Maybe this comes up. And then the question becomes is, what's the context here? I was just dealing with a camp 2 weeks ago that closed its doors because they couldn't hire counselors. So am I upset about the lazy counselor situation, or am I happy that camp pulled through and has counselors that are watching my kid? Now, the other thing I want to highlight here, and I'm not here to, I'm also a parent of kids in camps, and we all know the journey. I once heard a line, and I want to highlight the line. When you play tug of war is a game that got outlawed in most children's systems for a lot of valid reasons, because we all played it when we were kids. The question is, when does the game start? And of course, there's all these contexts, but the game starts the second you touch the rope. You're playing the game. You touch the rope, you're already pulling and trying to win. And in a power struggle, it's the same thing. The second you start pulling that tug of war rope, you're playing the game. And now the question becomes is, do I want to be having a power struggle with my kid's counselor? Do I want to be having a power struggle with the director? And if it's over a freeze pop, was it worth it? If it's over the kid scraped knee, of course, my kid gets a scraped knee. I want to know why that happened. My kid calls me up during whatever the 2 phone calls in 17 minutes they're allowed during camp, and they say, by the way, this happened. I'm like, wait a second. That happened? I'm hearing about this from you. So that means the counselor is a buffoon and the director is a this and the person's that. But I need to take a step back for a second. Again, what's the goal? What's the expectation? What's the purpose of camp? Am I going to get it from picking up that rope with that counselor? Am I going to get it from driving this away that it's maybe will get me the win, that haha, I'm right and the counselor's wrong. The counselor really shouldn't be watching children. The counselor really doesn't know what they're doing, or they're really the camper and my kid's really the counselor, or whatever other mindsets. But am I going to get what I want out of this situation? And I found that if I pick up the rope 99% of the time, I'm not going to get what I want. And I think we talk about what we want. It's really important to take a step back, take a breath. Rabbi Chaiton obviously talks a lot of camps. Maybe it's bringing someone into open dialogue with that camp. Maybe it's reaching out to somebody. Maybe it's throwing an extra tip in somewhere. I'm sure we all are challenged with the idea that camp already costs so much. I have to throw in a tip. But the tip might be the game changer. And the question is, am I going to nitpick $20 if that's going to make it the summer that they need it? And again, I hear exactly the question you're asking. And we do get the other, both of us and many others get the other sides of those questions. I like to think about it. Are they doing the best they can with what they've got? And if they are, then what are we asking them to do? So again, great dialogue and thought process you got going.
Good, thank you. Really appreciate that input. Just to bring it down to what I like to always do, practical tools. One mindset that I have found practical, and they use this in the trauma-informed approaches, is that instead of coming to the situation with a foregone conclusion, come to it with questions. And you kind of mentioned that. What do I know about the situation? As you're hearing information, don't assume you know everything. Have questions. Be curious about it. Now, at the end of the day, you might be right. You might be absolutely correct that the camp mishandled the situation. But again, just touching on what you said to kind of summarize that, is that when we come to a problem with question mindset, trauma-informed means what is going on here? What happened that I didn't necessarily see? What don't I know? What am I curious to find out? Often can be the difference between finding a communication that will help in the future or to resolve the current problem and making it a blown up power struggle and so on. This is a perfect continuation to the final segment, and we're going to wrap it up with this, and that is post-camp. How do I react when my child is sharing what happened in camp? And I think what you said really leads right in, because yes, let's say my child has that Erev Shabbos phone call, 2 minutes, the whole camp is really listening in, there's not much privacy, but my child, for whatever reason, out of the whole week, shared this piece of information, that Beryl said this to me, or Chani did this to me, or I grazed my knee. What is going to be your immediate response right then and there? If you say, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened to you. They let that happen to you. They didn't call you. What's going to be going through your child's mind now? How, again, we talk about perspective. What perspective will your child now get about the summer? He's going to start doubting the authority, the connection, the safety that's around him. He's going to start questioning, am I really enjoying myself here? She might wonder, what exactly is, who can I trust? So that information that we hear might be shocking and disturbing. But we have to ask ourselves, is my response going to help my child process that? Or is it going to make a bigger trauma, a bigger anxiety, and a bigger issue? And I think oftentimes when a kid comes home, and I'm going straight into that, is when a kid comes home from camp, that is precisely where we have the opportunity to shape that camp experience. We spoke about goals. We spoke about having a mindset. What do we want to accomplish? What are my expectations? All of that really happens after camp. Why? Because during camp, they are involved in the situation. There's not that much time to process everything from a step back in the full picture. Of course, the day-to-day incidents they're processing. But from a big picture, what are you taking out of the summer? What did I gain from the summer? How did I grow in the summer? That happens after the summer, how you respond. So let's say, for example, you pick your child up from the bus and they're lugging their suitcases, they're dirty, they're tired. And on the way home, you say, no, so tell me about your summer. And they start telling you about the soccer, and they start telling you about the learning council. And then they tell you, no, on the third day of camp, they served us cold chicken because we were running off schedule. Cold chicken? They gave you cold chicken? I would never give you cold chicken. Okay, go on. What happened next? And then we had Shabbos and we won Shabbos competition. But 1 second, they really served you cold chicken? Like they really did that? Like what are they thinking? They couldn't warm it up for you? Okay, go on. And then they go on, and then you go back to the cold chicken. My point is that if we respond by highlighting an area, then your child thinks, yeah, what a crazy camp. They didn't take care of me. They served me cold chicken. And really, okay, so they served you cold chicken, move on, move past it. Now I'm using that as a silly example, but that cold chicken is so many things. It could be an incident that is serious, but doesn't have to define their summer. And not only that, even if it was a bullying incident, an emotionally abusive incident, so on and so forth, we still have the opportunity to frame it. How should my child react to this? Does that incident need to frame their whole summer? So going back to the opening conversation, which is by expanding and giving new perspective, at the end of the summer, we do that as well. We don't want to create trauma and anxiety in places where it didn't have to be. We don't have to blow it up in a way that shouldn't have happened. So we're not probing for problems. Did anyone touch you? Did anyone bully you? Did anyone say this to you? No, that's just feeding negative information to a child, making their mind wander in dark and scary places that it doesn't have to. So let the information come out through curiosity. Let them talk from a place as they're processing it. We don't want to ask them questions that make them sum up their summer. Did you have a good summer? It was great or it was horrible? Really? That's how you're going to sum up 8 weeks? I can barely sum up a single day that way. I have ups and downs, moments that I'm proud of, moments that I struggled with. So we have to be able to ask our children questions that allow them to compare and contrast. Did you play soccer? And last year you didn't play soccer. Did you meet any new friends? Last year you met Beryl, Chaim, and Yitzi. Who did you meet this year? Who do you feel like you want to call and be in touch with after the summer? So we let the curiosity come out in a way that frames the conversation to allow them to think about what happened. And then you go to your expectations and your goals. I wanted my child to meet new friends. So we probe in a healthy way along those lines. And you say, wow, so yes, the food wasn't great, but my goal of my son socializing really was accomplished. Look, he's in smiling pictures with so many bunkmates. The counselor texted me that he really got along with other kids. So that is what we should be celebrating. That is what we should be highlighting, because that means the goals of our summer were reached. And if they bring up issues that happened, again, that same process of empathy can go into place, how they felt about it, what they can do about it. And I think I'm going to conclude with this. And therapy talks about 5 else's, ELSE, which is what else, who else, how else, where else, and why else. Good contrasting types of questions where we expand. It's not just, was it bad? Bad compared to what? Bad compared to your expectations. Did it ever happen before? How did other kids react to it? So we're curious to find out the full dynamics of the situation. And that really is what shapes their summer. We talk about what's a successful summer. That success is defined by how we react to it as well. So just to sum it up, and I think it really comes full circle, and that is that when we set out with goals and expectations, and we're honest with ourselves, and we are upfront with not being scared of our children's problems, but rather how we can approach them in a healthy way, then we can come full circle and say, I had a good summer. Which areas do I need to identify as problems? Again, maybe they do have social issues. Maybe they have learning issues, which came out during the summer. But we learned that without making that define their summer. So the next year comes, okay, so this was a struggle. This wasn't great. Let's build on those successes as well. Any closing thoughts, Rabbi? And as Rabbi Blumstein is sharing those, please put your questions in the box if you have any, and we'll move straight into the Q&A. So Rabbi, closing thoughts, please.
I think we covered a lot of great points here tonight. And again, anything that we can do to help, obviously, is the chat. And then there's ways of getting hold of Rabbi Chaiton myself. And ultimately, I think we should strive for and pray for and hope for that it should be a transformative summer. Just learning a mimer about tshuva and the idea that tshuva doesn't have to be from a weak point to a strong point. You can be in a strong point and you can get so much stronger. Hopefully, we're not hoping our summer is going to transform our child and fix our child. But no matter what, hopefully our summer transforms our children, and through that can transform our family and further.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight and experience. If you enjoyed this session, this webinar presentation, please share your feedback. It's very valuable for others as well, so we can expand and we can grow and we can bring more opportunities and discussions, important ones, to others as well in the future. So your feedback is valuable. It's not always comfortable asking for it, but it is valuable to others. So please share your feedback and your thoughts. Email, if you have my number, WhatsApp, the chat box, however you want to share it, please do so. I am going to look at the chat and see if there's any questions. It doesn't look like. Go back to the beginning. Okay. So here's a technical question. We'd love to listen to it again. So yes, Be'ezus Hashem, it's going to be uploaded with a YouTube link. And I'm going to share that with whoever signed up. I know many people couldn't make it in person, but this was something that we are sharing the link with as well. Another question, is it possible to ask too many questions after camp? Sometimes my kids seem annoyed when I keep asking for details. So I'm going to answer that, and Rabbi Blumstein, you can jump in as well. Yeah, absolutely. There is a possibility of asking too many questions, especially when they're pointed questions, when it seems like we're trying to fish for certain information. Typically, we want kids to process their experience in their own way. And many of these therapists, and we're talking about leading professionals who deal with children specifically, who have gone through the most horrific of traumas, will tell you that the healthiest approach is to let the child process it and share the details. Now that's in an extreme case, but definitely in a small case. Yes, we're dying to know everything, both from a safety point, a curiosity point, but yes, there is asking too much because they can seem annoyed, and that's rightfully so. We need to let them process it and let them share their feelings. When they start doing that, we're going to ask questions that are guided so that we get more information, so we understand what happened. So yes, there is a fine balance. I would definitely say there is. But when the opportunities come up, which they do, kids, not all, but often they'll a piece here, some more chatty, some take time. And then you can ask a quick question here or there. It doesn't have to be everything at once. It could be, how did swimming go? And talk about that. It could be, how's the food? And things like that. So yes, we should debrief, as I call it, in a responsible and sensible way. Anything to add there?
100% agree. Studies show that, especially for a child, therapeutic rapport, they're using your dialogue to do self-therapy, so to speak, to do self-introspection, does best when they're controlling how much they're sharing and when. And when we start trying to utilize the moment that they opened to broaden it and make this a whole dialogue, they may not want to go back to that point. So maybe the kid, 2 weeks after camp is like, so I might have had a little of a disagreement with my counselor. Oh, tell me more. So what happened? Like, let's back up. I don't know, whatever. It was just over sports. It was nothing major. That's going to be a interesting component point now. Is this where I want to delve in, or is this where I want to just create safe space and just be listening? Because truth be told, is whatever skirmish they have with the counselor at this point doesn't matter. It's probably not going to be the counselor next summer. If the counselor likes them, they'll reach out, and if not, they'll never hear from them again. Or they'll meet up 30 years from now at some sort of wedding and be like, hey. So if we're allowing them space to touch on a moment, some exposure points for kids to work through moments are as short as 6 seconds. Some are as long as 20 seconds. Most of them don't go an hour. So doing that all in one shot may not give us the experience we want, and creating space to listen will hopefully give them what they need from those experiences.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. And the final message, and I appreciate it. Love to hear from you and Rabbi Blumstein again together. So that's greatly appreciated. And thank you for your perspectives and attitudes. Well, thank you for being here and joining. And again, if you enjoyed, please share your feedback and share it with others. If you found it helpful, tell me what it was, tell Rabbi Blumstein what it was, and share that message with others. I'm going to stop the recording here, and I wish you all a gesunden Zummer, tremendous hatzlacha, and Jesus chassidische nachas from all your kids.